and Thursday. And she's going to do a presentation along with Chris on the action-based learning and the movement and performance she does with our students. Kind of give us some background on the science that's behind it so that we can all understand that better and give us some examples, which will be exciting. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. How fun. I want to start out with introducing Chris. Chris Kirchman is an athletic training student, and he has volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday since last August to come out and play with me and to play with your children. And I just want to, I don't know how to give them kudos. Chris makes fabulous, and he has such a love for your children. And I'm so blessed, and I could not have done this year without Chris. So I just need to lay that out there to start with.
And your other name is?
Are you Monkey Man or Nacho Libre?
Nacho Libre.
He's a Nacho Libre.
I've heard about them in
They come dressed up every now and then.
Every now and then,
So,
yeah.
Quite cute. What I want to get into tonight is to give you some of the research and science behind why we do what we do and why we don't just roll out a ball and play soccer or play football or play softball, whatever it might be. And I want to start also by saying that there's a wealth of information and a wealth of research, but I don't want to inundate you with all of that stuff because it can be overwhelming. And I want to just give you some of it so that we can just whet your appetite, but let you know there's really a method to the madness. Again, this is Chris. I'm Nancy Cummings. I'm the Department of Shared Physical Education. And I also am the Director of Collaborative Research on campus, and I do a lot of research projects with our students. And what I'm going to challenge you with is by the end of the time that we present, you have to figure out which one's Chris and which one's me. So that's one of your biggest challenges for this time that we're together tonight. Chris did not authorize me to do that. I don't know. It remains to be
I didn't see
seen.
the monkey.
I know. Who could be who? And this is just a brief overview of how we actually learn. And I don't want to go into great detail because really that doesn't necessarily matter to you. The important thing is that your student does learn, that your child does learn, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Simply when we think or hear, read the word cat, and as I'm going up through this, it's also how it goes up and through your brain. So you hear the word cat, you see it in text, you read it, and then we have a lot of stuff that goes on which we call decoding, and that occurs in different parts of your brain. Once that occurs, your child can identify the word, it becomes word memory after it's repeated several times, and then we have text comprehension that CAT actually is this thing over here, the long tail that goes meow. Now the interesting thing, when we look at the brain and we follow that process, if you look at the different parts of the brain, the areas that it walks itself through actually is every area of the brain. There are just a few, it doesn't necessarily hit visual cortex, but it can if it's a written word. But the fun thing is that as we pass right through here, this is sensory and motor cortex, which is where Chris and I come into play. And anytime we do something, we're actually spanning that part of the brain that helps also with the coding, the reading literacy with your children. And the big takeaway that I want you to have tonight is that your brain doesn't care. And it really does not care or matter if you're learning something conceptually, whether it's written, heard, or read, or if you're doing it movement-wise, and we're going to go through that research. If you remember how the process occurred, it always has to pass through the motor and the sensory cortex. And you know the phrase, that you've probably heard it, that once you're born, you have as many brain cells as you can have. You get to college, you kill a few. The fun thing that we're finding with the research, and the huge research is coming out of Harvard, the big opening gateway was in 2008, where we found out that you don't get more brain cells, but you have little dendrites. And with movement, we actually can increase the number of those dendrites. So if the communication pathway of learning occurs reading, written, auditory, or movement, and if with movement we can increase secondary dendrites, we can now increase that neural pathway. And what we try to do is wake up the brain so when they come in here, it's easier for them to read, to speak, to write, and to do math. And it's a fascinating concept that we've really stumbled upon in the last couple of years. This is a tip for educators. We're all included in this because you're educating at home as well. And this will be a good reinforcement for you. This was by some of the professors I had in my doctorate program. What I like to focus on are the bottom three. We learn 70% of what we discuss, and if you think of how you do your homework with your children, this is huge. We learn 80% of what we personally experience, that's the doing. It doesn't matter if it's playing with Play-Doh, you walk them through a letter, you have them lay down and do a letter, you have them finger paint with putting a letter. We will learn 80% of what we personally experience, and we learn 95% of what we teach others. So that's where we'll do peer teaching. We have them review the games, show them, tell them, your classmates. They will learn 95% of what they teach somebody else. And as educators, again, this is huge and pivotal. Chris probably now better understands why I do what I do in my classrooms, because I have my students do so much. And when we go back and remember the brain, every time they do, it passes through here. And your brain doesn't know the difference between learning it cognitively versus learning it through movement. Because whether we're learning, reading, writing, or we're moving, we're creating secondary dendrites. So we just approach it a little bit differently. This can be a very intense section of the research, but I just wanted to pop it out there. Madigan, Jean Blades Madigan is one of the biggest action-based learning researchers in my area, and she is huge in elementary education and moving. She was an elementary ed teacher for about 25 years and now travels the world and presents on how do we better move our children so they can learn and remember and be better and more effective in the schools. And she breaks movement down into 3 phases. The first one really is just what we call movement. And that means just moving in and through your environment. And a lot of things happen here just by simply moving. An example right now, I choose this, I've presented with this on the national level, and this is a picture of a Chinese IT center. And they're just row upon row upon row of computers. And they sit all day long. Imagine having to get up for a bathroom break. I mean, do you climb over your computer or go under the table? What do you do for that? That was my big question. What do you do for a break? But when we just move, when you guys got out of your car and you walked in here, you're increasing blood flow. All these fascinating things are happening. You're carrying oxygen and glucose to your brain. You're increasing metabolism. What happens when we sit for a period of time where we're not moving is you have a lower oxygen, which can create confusion, fatigue. You know when you're being lectured at? Okay, we get tired, you kind of get into that little sedated situation. But what we found out, and this came from the research from Harvard, and we've known some of this, but your brain is only 1/50th of your total body weight, but it requires 1/5 of your oxygen. So to us, that means move. I don't care how wide, just move. Because by just simply moving, we're going to get the blood to flow, gets the nutrients to the brain, makes the brain better receptive to learning of any kind. Her second phase is physical activity, and this is where we intentionally do something. And this is pictures of some of the kids here. This is Chris, and I believe this was 3rd grade. And this is some students in my class who actually have them play with Play-Doh. They build the slide and filament theory. We attach muscles to bones and do stuff like that. But when we're in our second phase, which is voluntary intentional movement, what we're doing here is you're actually crossing over different parts of your brain. And with that intentional movement, we're hitting the, not that you want the details of the parts of the brain, but we're hitting these 3 areas, which when we go back to that map of the brain, that's where it actually then begins to cross up and over, which is key, because when we look at the areas that are touched by dyslexia, that walks right through those areas that are impacted with dyslexia as well. The third phase of movement, which is what we call exercise, which is any type of intense physical activity. And I was going to have you guys get up and do 10 jumping jacks, but it's been a long day, because I do try to practice what I preach. Chris, go ahead. But it's with this serious physical activity, which is where we try to do what we do, and that's why we don't just do soccer all the time. We do very specific activities with an intentional focus every day, and then we have a play game afterwards. And what happens here, and this is what we're trying to do with your students before your children, before they come back into the classroom, is we get them all excited. We're, the brain, the body is pumping out all the endorphins, but what we're actually doing at the same time is letting the brain go into homeostasis, which actually balances everything. The intense physical activity actually balances the brain. And we're getting them to try to move as much as possible, sometimes sliding in mud puddles. I apologize if that was your kids. I think Chris asked me to do it, I'm not sure. But we play hard. We try to keep them very vigorously active for about at least 20 to 25 minutes. The research is saying that the carryover lasts for up to an hour. So what we've done is woke up your brain. Everyone, they come in, they have water, they have their snack afterwards, which is the perfect formula for success, because we activated all the stuff in the brain intentionally, and you'll see with the next couple of slides that certain activities wake up different parts of the brain. So on some days we focus more on skipping, on some days we're working on throwing, we have them throw right, we have them throw left, and we're crossing the corpus callosum, which is the middle part of the brain, and that actually helps with math and literacy. Who knew? Skipping and swimming helps wake your brain up and prepares the brain for reading. Who knew that? And that's going to be part of the homework assignment in just a little bit. But we know now definitively that the carryover in waking up the brain with intentional activity lasts for about an hour. So Chris and I do what we do to get your students ready and prepared to come in back into the classroom, because now the brain is as awake as it's going to be all day long, unless they get up and play again. And that's a very key point. This is a summary of a lot of other research, and I just wanted to focus on Jean Blake's Madigan, because hers is the critical point of why we're restructuring physical education typically into movement and performance in most of the elementary ed curriculums. 45 seconds of activity lasts for 15 to 20 minutes. Get them to stand up and do something in the classroom. When you're working with them on homework, a lot of times, I've been there, we try to focus and stay focused, have some water also. Have some carrots and hummus. But if we just get them to get up and walk around, play tag around the house or the island in the kitchen, and then sit them back down, you woke their brain up, you have a 20-minute window. Jump on. Because they'll be focused for about 20 minutes. If you do 45 seconds of activity, that's huge. Because usually what we do is, let's just sit down, you know what I mean? And I was guilty of it myself. Calm down, no, just focus.
Look and listen.
Be still.
Sit.
But our children are wired for movement. It's innate, they're wired for it, and our children are wired for it. So we need to allow that. But what happens is, if you remember the other slide, it actually creates that homeostasis, it balances them. And it will last for 15 to 20 minutes, so we have a golden window here. And we want to seize that. The other thing, and I just touched on this, is that we know now definitively through the research coming out of Harvard that we can grow new neurons through intentional movement. And the neurons mean that we have a better pathway. So if you think of spider webbing, if all you had was this connecting to this, I just have one point of connection. But if now I grow 5 instead of just the 1, and I then have connections coming out of here, I now have 5 different pathways that a signal can be transmitted. And again, it doesn't matter if it's movement or cognitive. We've created those new neural pathways, and that will increase the likelihood that reading, literacy, and math will improve as well. The 7 steps is coming from Dr. Rady out of Harvard as well, and we know if you take a minimum of 7 steps, and Chris can remember, I used to do this in my class, what I want you